Alright, well I'm just going to jump straight into this video. I've got two paths that lead off from my garden, one to the greenhouse and one to the back of my pump house. And both of them over time have settled to the point that they're lower than the ground and the grass sits around them. And that's become a real problem because every time it rains, water ends up pooling on top of these paver paths. And that's really encouraged the mold and mildew and the moss to grow on or in between these paver stones, which really takes away from the look of the path itself and actually makes it slippery to some degree when it is wet. This is what this paver path looked like before I pressure washed it and got it all cleaned up. You can see the buildup of moss and mildew on the pavers. Well, here I am cleaning the other path, and you can see how there's no water runoff, which means any dirt that ends up on this path stays there. Well, before I go any farther, let me do this intro, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and watch all my other videos. Well, if I'm going to raise this path up, that means I'm going to have to remove all these stones and put down a new base underneath them. Now, as I remove these stones, I'm trying to keep them in some kind of order, because I want to be able to put them back in the same spot without too much problems. And believe me, they all look the same after you move them off the side. Well, I've got a John Deere tractor and a really sandy driveway, so I just went and got some of the sand out of my driveway to use as a base. I have used it in the past and it has worked just fine. Well, the next step is to spread all the sand out. In the end, I want this sand to be almost level with the ground around it. That way I know my pavers are going to be above the grade by at least an inch. And while I'm raking through all this sand, if I find any pieces of grass or living plant material, I'll take the time and make sure I remove all that material as I'm raking through it. Once I raise the base to the height that I want it, I'll go ahead and tamp everything down so that I can put the pavers back in place. And here you can see that I chose to raise the base of the path to the same height as the top of the original pavers. There are machines that you can rent that will actually compact the paver base, but I'm content with just using my own body weight for this particular project. Now comes the tricky part. It's trying to put all these pavers back in the exact same spot they came out, because this path is shaped in such a way that I had to cut almost every one of the stones along the sides. And if I don't get it lined up right, well, I've been here before. I'll be trimming stones to make everything fit. If you enjoy playing Tetris, I'm sure you would enjoy this, because it's just a guess of how everything was. I did not set the stones off in such a way that I can line them right back up. So now I'm going to be paying the price. It took quite a while to get all these pavers back in the right spot, and I still didn't manage to get them all. I'm going to have to cut something. And it's sort of funny. If you rewatch this, look at the shadow cast by the building. You can see it move as I'm working. Like I said earlier, I raised both of these paths, and here is the path that goes from the greenhouse to the garden. I switched to this path only because I've got a better camera angle for you to see what's going on. You pull the pavers up, you raise the paver base with the sand, you pack it down, and then you put the pavers back in place. And you just continue this process until you have worked through the complete paver path. One thing you can see is I'm not using any kind of border or plastic or piece of material that's designed to run along the outside edge of the pavers. And that's probably the reason 4 years ago when I first put down this paver path that I put it as low as I did. I was probably using the current grass and outside ground to become the edge that held the pavers from sliding out. The borders are also really good at keeping the grass and plant material from growing from the outside into the pavers or in between the pavers. But I edge these really good with a weed eater, and I've never had a problem with the grass growing into the pavered path. As a matter of fact, the only problem I've really ever had with the pavers wanting to slide out of place along the edge is when you're cutting the grass with the lawnmower. The weight of the lawnmower, or if you're turning the wheel while you're on the edge of the path, seems to want to pull the pavers out of place. And that's why the paver path by our breezeway has an outside plastic edge in place. Well, this video had to do with paver maintenance. And over the life of your paver stones, you're going to end up having to do some kind of cleaning to them. Whether you're using a brush or some kind of spray-on application that's supposed to kill any of the algae or fungus or moss that's growing on them, or using a pressure washer, you're going to have to clean them at some point. If you use a pressure washer, you're definitely going to have to go back with some kind of sand or base material to fill in between the pavers, because there's just no way you're going to be able to pressure wash these pavers without pulling or kicking some of that material out from between the pavers. If you're reworking your pavers, you may have better luck than I do, but the end is always the most difficult part. You have to go back and move things around trying to get all these pavers to fit back where they went to originally, and it can be a real trial and error at times. It probably took me about 15 minutes shuffling these pavers around before I finally could tamp in the last one, which just left, at least on this side, to fill in between the pavers up with sand. So let's get back to the other paver path. Well, here you can see, despite my best efforts to get all the stones back in place, I just could not seem to fit them back in such a way that there weren't some that just didn't fit. So I'm going to have to cut these stones and make them fit. And I'm going to cut them into shape with this. It's a tile cutting saw that I've had for probably about 10 years. It was a very cheap and inexpensive model that was at one of the box stores when I was working on a bathroom project. And I've used it to cut all the concrete pavers ever since I started putting them down. So I'll fill it up to water until it starts to come out this overflow tube. And the saw blade is actually a diamond tipped saw blade, and it'll cut through these concrete pavers with no problem at all. It's just a little messy. My head's out of frame, but I am wearing safety glasses, and you'll need those because it'll sling water all over the place when you first start using it. Well, that diamond tip blade doesn't stick up far enough that I'll be able to cut through these pavers in one pass. So I'll turn the paver over and cut it again, and all I have to do is just bump it on top of the table and the piece will fall off. Now I'll run this piece across the saw blade at an angle a couple times, and that should knock off that straight edge, and that'll make it look much more natural. And I'll do this for each of those 5 pavers that I need to cut down to fit back into the pathway. Well, I'm not going to win any awards for my videotaping, but there you have the 2 pieces that we've cut, and now I'll go put those in the path. Here you can see my face and why it's so important to wear those safety glasses. The saw really slings water up all over the place. Well, now that we've got these pavers cut to the right size, it's simply just a matter of slipping them into place where they go. Well, hello, there's our friendly dog Rascal. Nice to see ya. It's really not that difficult to cut the pavers, and it's a good solution to my problem. And then I'll need to fill in any voids between these pavers with some sand. A lot of times the bags of paver base that you pick up from the box stores are kept outside in the garden area, and they might be wet, which means when you dump it out onto your freshly laid pavers, you're not just going to be able to sweep it into all the cracks. You probably will have to use a hose and rinse it in, or just let it sit there till it's dry and then you can sweep it in. I'm really lucky. All the pine straw and grass is floating on top of the water, and it's not getting pushed down in between the pavers, which means all I have to do is just reach down with my hand and I can pick it up and just put it off to the side. Well, here I've got some dry sand that I'm going to sweep in between the cracks of the pavers. And I think it's probably easier with dry sand if you're not trying to fill in any voids that might be actually underneath the pavers. Yeah, the best way to fill in any voids that might be underneath the pavers is definitely by using the water. Well, there you go. I think it's about time we wrap this video up. I think I've shown you about everything I can on how to raise up a paver path. So let's just take one final look on how things turned out. We started by taking the pressure washer and cleaning off the paver paths. Then we needed to raise these pavers up because they were actually below the ground that was around them. So we removed the pavers and we raised it all up by putting down a new base and put the pavers back on top of it. Then we locked all the pavers in by filling all the joints in with sand. And that leaves us with two clean and raised paver paths that look like they're new. I hope this was beneficial to you guys. And this has been, and I'm just going to say, like, subscribe, check out my playlist, and I'll see you in one of those garden videos again.